Ever think you might need a little more out of life? Why not try Chasing Diamonds with Andy Cordley, a podcast aimed at bringing out the extraordinary nature of the human experience and the curiosity, wonder, and creativity that drives it. It is his most sincere hope that today's episode tickles your fancy. So now, without further ado, here is your host, Andy Cordley.
Welcome, everyone, to the show. My dumbass wrote another essay, so I'm here this weekend to talk about it. I've called this one Truth Earned, and it's as I zero in closer and closer to my trips abroad, coming up to South America and to Africa. I'm beginning to wonder more and more, like, what is it about me and my brain that makes me do these things? And in an effort to try and churn out more content while the weather still sucks, I've come to this kind of idea that of truth earned. And what I mean by that is I'm going to start just by talking based on what I wrote in the preamble, which is basically like, so today, how readily is information available? That is, and I think we'll find that it's the most valuable and, well, maybe not the most valuable. Food might be a little more important, clean water, etc. But I think you'll find that information is one of the most valuable and most available of all resources in the world. And if you can afford a monthly phone bill, then you have the sum total of all human experience and information and thought in your pocket. And when you say that, you know, it's true. With my phone, I can look up the latest science on quantum mechanics, intimate details about ancient battles that took place 2,000 years ago, or I can connect with people who live in India, or Kazakhstan, or Namibia, or Canada, you know? And so, with this huge wealth of information, it's weird that we all have the ability to branch out in any way that we want to. For instance, now, and for an episode of the podcast, I'm doing an extremely hard job to try to learn some real basics about nutritional sciences, which is obviously a very academic study. But it's there. It's available on the internet. It's truth. It's facts. And it's there for anybody. But when we think that, you know, every piece of information that has ever been spawned from a human mind is available to us, you think back, or at least I can't help but think back to people like Socrates and Aristotle and Seneca, Copernicus, and Galileo, who we would consider to be great thinkers. We revere these people as the greatest minds. Newton, Einstein, Marcus Aurelius, etc., etc. We revere these as some of the greatest minds of their generation. And they would have killed for the information, the access to information that is available to the average 5-year-old of today. So does that mean, this is an interesting question now, does that mean, and it kind of dovetails with what I started the show with, does that indicate that I'm as smart as Socrates? Or you, the listener, are you as smart as Galileo? Are you as clever as Copernicus? Now, I don't think it would, because I think now that there's a difference between knowledge, intelligence, and wisdom. And I think that right off the bat, you can say that intelligence is, or at least to me, seems more scientific. It indicates, I would think, aptitude and IQ. Knowledge to me sounds like what I've decided to kind of refer to knowledge as truth studied, and then wisdom is truth earned. And the thing about the people in our society that we would label as wise are not people who would probably label themselves wise. In other words, I don't think it's something you bestow on yourself. I think it's wise is in the eye of the beholder, like beauty in that regard. But what does this mean? You know, what does this insane access of information do for us in terms of wisdom? because I think to say that people who are wise are generally respected the most of anybody who would be considered an intellectual, somebody who a smart person, a clever person, an insightful person. I think if you can say that person is wise, that's a very high praise indeed. So what does this insane access to information do for us in terms of wisdom? And what I was thinking about this on my lunch break at work, I think it's difficult to say really, but what I came up with, a really good example would be to open up Google and type in the Grand Canyon. And look at some of the pictures and admire its beauty, and then just close Google, book a ticket to Tucson or Phoenix, and then drive to Flagstaff and then visit the canyon. And the fractal sense of awe that you would have experienced looking at Google, you will find is uncomparable to the real thing. Now, I haven't been to the Grand Canyon, but for me, I think the example of this would go back to a story of mine that I've told probably many of you listening, which is that one day I was in Las Vegas, and I was in the Planet Hollywood casino, and we were at the buffet. When all 50 of the Miss America pageant contestants for that year came into the buffet with us. And they were all in full gown, and they all had their sashes on. And that's the difference there between seeing Grand Canyon live is seeing like Victoria's Secret models in the Victoria's Secret catalog that you receive, and then seeing what a real symmetrically perfect 6-foot-tall supermodel looks like. The difference is uncomparable. They don't even look real. It leads you to think like it's the same feeling I thought of when I was in Belgium and I saw this impossibly muscled, tall black guy whose muscle dimensions didn't resemble my muscle dimensions in any kind, despite the fact that he wasn't too much there wasn't too much more mass than in him than me. We'd probably be about the same weight, but I remember looking at my sister and being like, is that the same species as me? Really? I don't think it is. And it's the same thing was looking at those girls, was like, I don't think that I'm related to that creature. So I think that's truth earned. That's experiencing the reality in the purest way possible, which is going out and witnessing it, or doing it, or tasting it, or smelling it, or hearing it, or conquering it, or whatever, climbing it, sailing it, whatever it is. But going back to our Grand Canyon example, if you look at Google images of the Grand Canyon, you will gain a lot of knowledge and information. You can learn of its size and scale and depth and color and cost and how the different layers of sedimentary rock formed over millions and millions of years ago. You can learn all kinds of things. The ecosystem, what kind of plants grow there, what kind of animals live in that kind of strange environment. You can gain a huge amount of knowledge, but going and witnessing it, learning all of those things by looking and feeling and hearing and experiencing, that has much more of an impact than just a little log in your fleshy brain hard drive. Now, obviously, we can't all just go to the Grand Canyon whenever we want, but my point is, that's truth earned. That's experiencing it with all your senses. And there's nothing wrong with the alternative. There's nothing wrong with, this is partially, this is a huge part of my life, is using the internet, using books to learn about things that I would otherwise not have access to. That whole friggin' 3-parter episode about, the Eastern disciplinary mysticisms. I wasn't studying with, I wish I could have gone to China or India or Thailand or Japan and studied with Zen Buddhists or Taoists, but, I only have so many resources available to me. And I'm choosing to spend them on Africa and South America. So obviously there's nothing wrong with experiences and knowledge. But what if we What if we as a generation collectively decided to aim higher, to seek out truth earned and, wisdom, so that we can call ourselves a wise generation, a learned generation? There were times in the 1800s where the upper class of America was considered the wisest people in the world in terms of the languages they were able to speak and the knowledge of mechanics and economics and the world, the worldly nature. And because we were new, we were young, we were hip. And I think we can bring that back, but we'd have to make a collective decision to chase one thing instead of the other. The selfie at Machu Picchu is not nearly as powerful if you fly into Cusco. Actually, I want to take a second to explain something briefly, like this idea of, gaining truth earned through earning it, and getting real, actual insight into whatever it is. When I talk about it, I have to understand. I have to understand that most of the truth that I have earned is in silly subjects like trying to build a boat, and we'll get to that later. But most of it's travel, right? Because I like to travel, and that's something that I've done extensively. So I have to, again, as always, folks, I have to use the lens of my own life to communicate to you. But I can say that having traveled as much as I have done, I recognize that there are people who travel for an experience. You can spend a week in Rome and a week in Paris, and you can leave and you haven't learned anything. You haven't grown. You haven't earned anything. You have had a lovely time and a lovely experience, but I'm proposing that we aim higher. And in this world, you can get anywhere in 48 hours. You can get most places in 24 hours. Most of you people listening could be in a rural village in Eritrea in 24 hours. Give it 48 hours, and you could probably be in the process of being eaten alive by headhunters in Papua New Guinea in 48 hours. That's how interconnected our world has become. If you want to know what New Delhi is like, the streets of New Delhi, in an instant, you can try and find somebody online who will, over Facebook maybe, who'll tell you what life in New Delhi is like. So, with that in mind, going and traveling and experiencing the world can be very, I don't want to say false, because there's nothing wrong, again, about going and having a lovely experience, but the idea of a journey, a beginning, a middle, and an end, a process, a journey, traveling, unraveling the land, unraveling the culture, that is much harder to find these days. And obviously I've experienced it because, I spend more time talking and interacting with travelers, so you experience more of the international community. But I think that I would like to see more of it. We can use that example a second ago about Paris and Rome. You could stay a week in each and then take a bullet train to the other and then fly home, and you will not be able to say with much authority what Italians or French people are like. And I found that a lot too. When I got home, people would ask me, like, what are the French like? Do they really hate Americans? What are the Italians like, how they are in the movies? And I thought, wow, if I had structured my trip differently, I wouldn't have been able to answer that question. But as it did, I can answer those questions to a certain degree, because we planned our trip by opening Google Maps and drawing a line. And if the line from Paris to Rome went through, Marseille and Lucca and a few other places in between, traveling on regional trains, interacting with conductors and passengers and ticket sellers, like that is a way more realistic way of experiencing the landscape, and you see the granularity and the texture of the hills and the mountains, and you meet the people, and you understand better about why young French people dislike Americans, etc., etc. And then you can come home, and with a real authority, you can speak on those topics. But again, you can go from one, take the bullet train to the other, and fly home, and you'd have no more information about what French people are like than when you left. So that is as Henry Rollins describes, the wisdom of travel. You can't read it in a book. You can't smell it. You can't experience it from your door or your town. You have to seek it out yourself. And when I say you have to, I don't mean that everybody has to in the sense that you're some lesser being if you don't. Because I understand that there are people who don't like to travel. But when I refer to journeys, right, there's not a lot of accessibility to journeys in your average lifetime. I, like a lot of young people, use Tinder, and I'm not ashamed. Fuck y'all. Anyway, a lot of people say, a lot of women in their profiles say they like adventures, but like, what constitutes a real adventure these days? There are plenty of opportunities for experiences, and you can find plenty of things. Losing 30 pounds can be a journey. That can be a huge challenge, but like, to go there and back again, like Mr. Bilbo, that's not actually as easy as it sounds. And if you just take away, for starters, the logistical aspects like money and time off of work and stuff like that, it's a huge commitment. But the concept of the journey is so important to me because it goes back to the difference between knowledge and wisdom. An experience, destination hopping, a cruise. That's a good example. A cruise, staying at a resort in Cancun, right? These are lovely experiences that have great value. Sometimes that kind of rest and relaxation is so necessary for a human brain, but tracing the Inca Trail across the Andes like I plan to do, or riding across Vietnam on a motorbike like the Top Gear hosts did, or hiking the Appalachian Trail like my friend did, or sailing across the ocean like my aunt did, or backpacking across Europe like so many of us have done, studying Thai boxing in Bangkok like my coach, one of my Thai boxing coaches did. These are experiences that go beyond offering just like a pretty fond memory on the hard drive, a photo op, getting a break away from work. These will change you fundamentally. And I think one of the ways in which they will, and it's a good thing to a degree, is because no amount of money or studying can help you, well, not help, but can factor into the true result of how you will, deal with problems when you are traveling, when you are on a real journey. And it doesn't even have to be while traveling. It's just that's unfortunately the only opportunity that I have to convey these thoughts to you, because it's the only thing I've done. I could do music as well, but I feel like music might be less accessible to most of you guys, so I'm going to stick with travel, like I said. So when you get in trouble, when you have to face a challenge, whether that's missing a train, not having a place to sleep, running out of food, running out of money, getting robbed, getting threatened, whatever it is, when you get into trouble abroad, that's about as big a challenge and a scare as a person in the developed world can experience. Because I've experienced some dire straits in the first world here in America, and at no point, there was 1 or 2 points where I was sleeping on the beach and I was like, oh, this is fucked. But at no point was I seriously like, abandoned ship, shit's fucked. I always kind of had the idea like, oh, opportunity is everywhere, I'll get back on my feet. And sure enough, I did. But when you get in trouble abroad, there's only so much money, there's only so much preparation and information that can help you overcome those challenges. That's about as challenging and frightening a thing as any of us can experience. And it's often in those moments that you truly understand your ability to solve problems. You understand your mettle. You really get to know what you're made of. I would urge anyone to try and plan something of this nature into their life if they have the opportunity, because self-exploration and growth of that level is, I think it's a no-brainer to agree that is what you need to truly understand what you, again, are capable of and what you're made of. And I mentioned it, these sort of experiences change you fundamentally. And I think that's not the only change that occurs. I think you gain an insight into what truly matters. Like, if you go on a serious journey, especially across somewhere less developed, and you experience a harsher side of life, it shatters illusions that can be rooted deep in your brain, placed there by societal pressures, sort of urging you into a subservient lifestyle. And I got a little off track there. That's my opinion on modern society. Anyway, but you gain an insight into what truly matters. Like, damn, when I was in the Bahamas after that boar hunt, I just wanted a chair and that running water, and I had a cup of tea, and I'm like, damn, man, this is all that I want right now. I'm so happy. A journey can lead you to greater appreciation of what you have, or a drive to achieve what you want. How about that? That's a journey for somebody coming from the developing world to the developed world, like my friend Saqib. It gave him a greater drive to achieve what he wanted. It was a tough journey to go from the mean streets of Karachi, growing up in Dubai, here to Cleveland, going to university, and now he eventually joined the National Science Foundation, and now he works for the Department of Homeland Security. Like, that's a massive journey. But it's one that if he didn't take, he would never have had that drive to achieve. If he hadn't, I think the way he described it, right, where there was no plan B, plan A had to work. And he spun plan A as an impossible, as a too big to fail. And so it didn't. So that kind of change, when it occurs in a human, it's turning another page. Like, there is you before that moment, and there is you after that moment. There was me before traveling Europe and the Bahamas, and me afterwards. And when I go to South America and Africa, it'll be the same thing. Coming back, it'll be me before and after. Some of the countries I'll be driving through, guys, 40% of the population in Tanzania, I think it's Tanzania. Shit, I'm planning a lot of countries. Live below the international poverty line of $1.25 a day. A day. I need that. I've sort of taken to this idea of emotional tourism, right? As a practitioner of Zen, I train myself to remove the dharmas and to not master control of my emotions, but to completely remove them. So when you do that, as a byproduct, I become fascinated with emotions. And so now part of my travel is like emotional tourism. I want to put myself in situations where instead of seeing beautiful natural scenery or beautiful art or beautiful architecture, I want to see heartbreak and strife and poverty. And I want to see what it does to my head. I want to see what it does to my heart and mind and my perception on, what's valuable, my perception on altruism. Like, I think I could stand to be a more charitable person. But it's hard to connect with that when nobody is around me nobody is around me that's struggling. So those things, I'm sure, or at least I hope, I can't be sure, but I hope that I will return in a different, a better person as a result of doing that. I mean, it just so happens that in Tanzania there's also beautiful wildlife and beautiful wild places, but, going halfway across the world to a foreign town and seeing how they live, what kind of conditions they have, I can't imagine that won't make me more thankful of my conditions here. And traveling through Europe, I became more aware of it. I briefly met this teacher from South Africa, and just the one or two references she made back to her home, this was in Rome, it made my skin crawl, man. And I at that moment, I was like, I want to know more. I need to know more. It did, it also a huge factor were the Top Gear specials going to Botswana, Namibia, Tanzania, Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda. These were hugely important to my fascination with Africa. Anyway, but yeah, I think you get the point. And I think another thing is my next point that I wrote here in the essay is an untested mind will tell itself anything it wants. And I immediately thought of a perfect example, and you know how my examples can sometimes blow. But having trained martial arts for I was doing it 4 or 5 times a month or a week for 7 months straight, and then I kind of did another 3 months teetering off and on. So you could say approximately about a year. And having sparred kickboxing approximately 5 times, I know that every illusion I had as a kid about me being able to fight has been shattered into 1,000 pieces. When I was sparring and getting beaten up by guys bigger than me, knocked around, totally having no ability to judge my depth perception, or that really uncomfortable feeling you get when you get hit in the head. And there wasn't any heroic music in the background. And when I got hit, I didn't smile back or spit out blood. And I certainly didn't use an expertly placed kung fu sweep to drop my opponent on his head while I turned around to fight off all his friends. And now, as a result of that, I have no illusions about fighting, and I know it's terrifying, it's very painful, it's hugely challenging, and I wouldn't recommend it to almost anybody. So that's a perfect example of the untested mind will tell anything it wants. And the cure to this, the cure to the untested mind and the unexamined life is truth earned. It's wisdom. And that is most easily obtained through a journey. A lot of people think that because they went camping when they were in Boy Scouts and they learned how to tie knots and bullshit, they understand how to survive. If shit went down in society, they'd just run off to the woods. And I was the same way as a kid. I imagined the same thing. I was constantly imagining that Russia would invade, and I'd run off into the wilderness, and I'd set snares and catch rabbits and squirrels, and I'd always happen upon... There's always a berry bush in these stories, whether it's me telling them or a friend or listening. There's always a berry bush. It's always berries or nuts or something. It's shit, berries grow for a couple of weeks in the entire year in certain parts of the country, and most berries are poisonous. And, I can rub 2 sticks together to make a fire. I could hunt. But the reality couldn't be farther than the truth. And having now shot my bow, God knows I've shot probably 500 arrows on target. I'm like, this is fucking hard from 30 yards with a bow that's meant to do this sort of thing, a technologically advanced piece of hardware. Forget about tying gut or vines around a stick and trying to bring down... it's hard enough to bring down a deer or an elk, hitting it with a broadhead, anywhere but in the lung or heart. If you hit it in the gut, it's just going to run away. If you hit it in the shoulder, it might not even, might not even go past the skin. Those are big, powerful animals, man. Good luck taking them down with a fucking sharpened stick or a rock. So there's another untested, the untested mind makes the shit up for itself. The same concept could be applied to people. I'm reading now. The same concept would apply to people who think, oh yeah, the other day I was having a conversation. I think there was a bill going to Congress allowing that would allow the killing of bears and wolves in their dens. And when I had this conversation with this person, they suggested that the only way that that's humane is if you get, quote, down and dirty, and if you, like, you know, carve out your weapon and face him like a man. And I'm like, if you've ever... I wrote here in my essay, if you've ever been attacked by a dog, then you should have some notion of how ridiculous this is, but you wouldn't even have to be attacked by a dog. If you've ever had a dog get really excited and just walk into you, like the power of just their head and neck and shoulders, like that forward pressure that a dog has. Yeah, now imagine that multiplied 4 or 5 times and you have a wolf. Now imagine that multiplied by God and you have what it's like for a bear to go down on your face with its gnashers. So there's another example of the untested mind, right? If you have no idea what it takes, then you're immediately going to imagine yourself succeeding in that regard. And now we'll come to that moment I mentioned earlier about boats. When I was a kid, I was convinced that I could build a boat out of wood that I cut down with an axe. With an axe. A boat. And not a fucking dinghy. In my mind, it was a glorious Viking longboat with a dragon carved into the stern. Prow, sorry. Stern is the back. Like, these are not good mentalities for anyone other than a kid. It just makes you look foolish. You know, another example is I had a conversation with a woman a few weeks ago who explained that she almost got into a fight. She's kind of a naive college student, and she was telling me how she was sticking up for her girlfriend and almost got in a fight with this dude. And I'm like, fighting is horrible. You know, if you had provoked that man into hitting you, he could have easily shattered your cheekbone. And you would have been ugly and disfigured for the rest of your life. And the reason I bring that up is because that happened to a friend's friend of mine. Stupid bar fight, stupid disagreement. The guy was really drunk, and the guy he picked a fight with wasn't. And the dude kicked him right in the cheekbone and shattered it like the hollow. Shit, I'm so goddamn bad at saying anything after the word like. Or that's like So we're going to forget that analogy and move on. I thought I could build a boat, guys. The untested mind is something we have to be very wary of. And I think it's important to recognize that in yourself. The pattern within yourself to picture yourself as invincible and someone who can insurmount all challenges. Who, when they first start to drive, after the first few months, you're not nervous anymore. Who thinks that they're the best driver in the world? I did. And I'm sure that some of you did too. And I wonder, is it down to like a bias against like hard work that we tell ourselves how easy these kind of like enormous tasks can be? Like, if I have this in my head watching kung fu movies as a kid that I can just beat up anybody without training. Like, oh, I've watched movies. I know how to throw a sidekick. I wonder if that's like a way to the body tricks us and prevents us from doing work. Because I know the mind does that. I think I explained that, and it likes simple processes, and it'll try to trick us into doing shit the same way so that it doesn't have to change. It can use less energy. I think I heard somewhere that 40% of your glycogen stores go to running your brain. So that's a tremendous that's why the brain has those little energy saving methods, because that's a huge amount of glycogen that could be going to your muscles and cells. So I wonder if it's like down to hard work. Or a bias against like your brain being, oh shit, this motherfucker wants to go train jujitsu for 2 years. No, stop him. Anyway, whatever the reason is, when you go and seek wisdom in these things, when you go and earn truth, the realities become more and more apparent. Like after I cut the first goddamn log down and realized how cleaving an entire tree with hammers and wedges is an impossibly skillful task, requiring many, I imagine, years of practice. And I just thought I could do it just like that. And while we're talking about now, what about people causes this sort of daydreaming? What is inside a person like me, or like my friends, i.e. the kind of person who always wants to see around the next corner? Someone who needs to know how they would handle any given extreme situation. What makes the brain want to hike the Appalachian Trail? Or I just listened to a podcast about a person who biked across the nation twice. And not just in straight lines, just diagonally and all over the fucking paddock. What makes the brain so curious? What combination of flipped genes or hormonal balances? I have no idea. I might have to go study that. Might have to gain some truth studied in that regard. But I think curiosity is the great crucible for wisdom, but also for knowledge and wisdom. And this manner of false certainties, typos. Oh, I'm so terrible. Anyway, I don't think it helps to try to convince yourself that because you read about sword fighting in a book that you could beat Achilles. There's an analogy that I can be proud of, I think. Or maybe not. I don't know. Hopefully people listening know who Achilles is. I think, the difference between an experience that changes you and an experience that goes in in a photo album is, I don't want to say separates the valuable members of society from the non-valuable members of society, but at least for me, it would be way more interesting for a person to talk, interact, be with somebody who is either on that path, wants to be on that path, or has completed that sort of path. A journey, planning, saving up resources, picking out one of the most, I've had so much fun on this trip. I would consider that I've already started my journey across South America and South Africa. I think I started it last November when I started slowly beginning to research and pick out all of the pieces of gear and equipment that I'm going to bring on this trip. Like my new mobile podcasting setup, which I hope to test out with you guys soon. I'm going to talk about that at the end of the episode. I have some plans for future episodes I want to tell you about. But all the pieces of clothing, buying the clothing was so much fun. Like examining what kind of environments I'd be in. And I got all this badass, like, unrippable fabric that has baked-in insect repellent and sheds water really easy and is so, really thin and can be folded up really easily. I got merino wool undergarments. It's been really fun picking out all the different kinds of supplies and equipment that I'll be needing. My backpack is so fucking badass. My brand new Teton, I think it's like 80 liter or something. It's enormous. Getting my high-tech sleeping bag, my binoculars, and it's really fun. Hiking boots. I just went on an odyssey picking out my hiking boots. But if you imagine the kind of terrain you're going to be tackling across the Andes Mountains and 3,500 miles of Africa, then you tend to do your research on such things. So I would always already consider that I'm on that journey, and that's the start. That's the real start of the journey. And then there's the deep breath, and then the plunge, and finding your feet, and then getting into the rhythm. And it's that classic the beginning of the second chapter, roast mutton in The Hobbit. And I think it opens with Bilbo he's had this weird Tookish moment, and he decides to go off on the adventure, and he's brimming with excitement and confidence. And then the first thing in the second chapter is like, they skipped breakfast, it rained all day, everything he owned got wet, and then they had a cold dinner, and he immediately hated his life and everything. And it's not that I want that to happen to me, but like that kind of stuff, those challenges are very unique, and dealing with low morale, like to just keep pushing on, dealing with discomfort, learning how tough you are, how long can you go without food, how fit are you. That's another part of this. The beginning of this journey is, I've been, altering my training regimen to make up for the fact that I'll be tackling mountains at 16,000 feet elevation. I'll be hiking with 20, 30 pounds of kit on my back, in an area where there's God knows how much less oxygen there is. So I have to be fit, my body has to be ready. But like cold night on the mountains in December, rain, when you go through that ordeal multiple times, you learn something about yourself. You learn what you're capable of doing, which allows for anybody to live a better life. Because it clears away the fog that the untested mind sort of sprays, wafts in front of your eyes, and kind of obscures what you're actually capable of doing. And then when you find out that, holy shit, I can do this, that's an incredible feeling. And I think as I get closer and closer to this trip, and these thoughts tend to stay more and more in my head, I want to share my progression of thought with you guys, because it's an interesting mental space that I've never occupied before. And I think that there's probably a really valuable perspective here somewhere. I have no idea if I was able to access or not with this talk of wisdom and being different than knowledge, but having started doing this podcast and hearing feedback from the people who it's affected, which is is an honor beyond comprehension for me. It's shown me that this is a very common theme in most people, the desire to challenge and test oneself, because we all want to be the sort of person who can fight off 3 guys and rub 2 sticks together and make a fire and kill a bear with a spear and run off to, Morocco and just instantly fit in with the locals because you understand that part of the world. Like, that's really romantic, a really romantic idea. And I'm seeing more and more as I grow up, growing up with different people around me, having been friends with a couple, and meeting different new friends. It's like that gene is still there. It's still present in us, and I would like to see it present in more people, because that's so cool. It's the Mark Twainian wisdom of travel, and you can't get it from a book, as Henry Rollins said. You have to go out there and do it, and find out what you're made of. Find out who you really are. For instance, I always imagined that France was excellent and I'd like all the people there. Turns out I didn't, and I wouldn't really like to live in France at all. I'd probably rather live in like Alabama or something. Well, that's probably not true, but I learned more things. I learned that I didn't expect to love Italy so much, and I didn't expect to like the Italians so much. But the way I have an understanding of the Italian mindset better than probably a lot of people who have been to Italy, because voulez-vouing with locals and seeing the different kinds of people there and meeting all kinds of regional folk and I said that already. Anyway, learning this, the way Ilaria said it to me when I met her in Rome. She's like, to be Italian is, and I have no idea if this is across the board, but to me it makes perfect sense, and it's the wisdom that I have, so it's the only truth that I can apply, and to me it is truth, because I saw that everywhere, is to be Italian is to try. And I thought that was beautiful. To try. And that was, and I remember after like the 5th day in Rome, we were leaving a bar, and the bus was coming to the stop, but it was late at night, and I just wanted to make sure that the bus picked us up, so I stepped out into the road and waved, and then Laudia says, now you're thinking like an Italian. Now you're trying. To be Italian is to try. And I that's a great example of the wisdom of travel. So again, for me, my lens is travel, and that's what I can relate this to, but a journey doesn't have to be doesn't have to be a physical trip across miles and mountains. It could be a mental journey. A journey could be, like I said at the beginning, losing 30 pounds. A journey could be going to college and studying, whatever you're studying at college. It could be learning a martial art. It could be, settling down with a family. That's a huge journey that never ends, right? The journey of creating your own family with a wife or husband, that's a huge journey that ends usually when you go in the ground. So, but again, travel is mine, and so that's what we'll focus on. And the only reason I started thinking about all this is because I have upcoming travel, and I'm so excited to see what people in rural Quechua villages in Peru say to me. If they say anything to me, what they are like. That's insight that I have to know. I have to know how those people live. I have to know that, whether rural, people who live in rural Africa, if they're as happy as we all would like to imagine that they would be, because they live in a beautiful, exciting part of the world. Do they let poverty get them down, or are they happy with what they have and share alike? I heard a story the other day about an MMA fighter who goes, his name's Justin Wren, he goes and in his spare time helps drill wells and improve the living conditions of the Mbuta pygmies, or Mbuti pygmies in the Congo, the tiny people. And he's like this big MMA fighter, and he sits down next to this kid who just spent 13-hour, 16-hour something work day and was paid with 15 peanuts. And the kid sits down next to Justin at the end of a long, hard day's work, and without even considering, without any thought whatsoever, just grabbed Justin Wren's hand and put 7 of the peanuts in there. I wish I could have figured that out on my own. Now, I'm not going to the Congo, but that's just dangerous. I'm going to some other places, but, that's what I hope to find out. And when I come back, I hope it changes me. I hope I gain, through earning it, truth. And I hope that maybe one day, many years from now, maybe one of the listeners might refer to me as wise. So that's the end of that brief thought, just to try to keep you guys occupied while we head into a busier period. I have 3 podcasts coming up next couple weekends. First one is with my friend from the Air Force. We're going to talk about all kinds of crazy shit he got up to, and talk about traveling, and talk about America and how shitty income tax is. That'd be fun. I shouldn't spoil these episodes. And then I have another one, which I'm excited about. I'm going to an event at the National Beagle Club, who hunt with beagles. One of my coworkers is the hound master. So he's invited me to this, it's called Hounds for Heroes. It's a benefit. And I'm going to watch live beagle hunting. And I'm going to have my mobile podcast studio with me, so I'll be able to interview him and other beaglers. I have no idea if the content will be any interesting, but I figure it's a good enough opportunity. And then I have some travel podcasts as me and my guest from episode 6, Hugo, begin our camping odyssey. We're going to go to some extraordinarily beautiful natural place in Virginia the 4th weekend of every month from now until I leave for South America. And I think this weekend, or the 28th, 29th, 30th of April, we are doing Shenandoah. Start with one close to home before we start tackling all those ones on the fucking Kentucky border 400 miles away from here. So have some good shit coming up. As I mentioned, I think in the last episode, a lot of you guys have been giving me amazing feedback. I just want to call out some names. Tony Uranker, Miranda Jaraneski, Patrick Gosek. Really love the feedback I've received from you guys. A while ago, it was Patrick Keating gave me some great feedback. Anyway, but I really appreciate that. You all gave it to me in person, though. If you or anyone now listening could translate this into like an iTunes review, for instance, that would be amazing. Or maybe invite some of your friends on Facebook to like the Facebook page, which increases my reach. That'd be hugely valuable to me as well. I will never ask you for money or anything like that. I will never advertise a product. If ever I was to reach a moment in this podcast's future journey where somebody feels like this would be a good platform for advertisement, I would never do a product that would, compromise me as a host. Let's say that, like, the product sucks or something like that. I wouldn't want to do that. Or I might do that and then post on Facebook and be like, hey, don't buy this, it's shit. Anyway, moving on. Your support is appreciated, and if you could show it in more ways, again, I couldn't thank you enough. And I'm thinking of adding in maybe like a little reward system. Maybe when I have more viewers, we'll get to that. But for now, stay curious. Look to earn that truth. Find your journey. And just have a good old time, man. And I'll talk to you soon, guys. Love you. Bye.